Thomas Edison used to say, he never failed. He simply succeeded from time to time with an invention that would reshape the world. The rest of the time, he tried hundreds of other things with only one issue, that they would never work. That's the kind of mindset and determination that drives progress. And throughout history, some inventions did far more than solve simple problems. They completely changed the world, and today, we're about to look at some of them. Number 7. Hero vending machine. The vending machine is now a pretty common sight and a necessary part of modern life. But as we've learned in school, it wasn't first invented by the English bookseller Richard Carlisle. The idea actually goes all the way back to the 1st century AD, when an ancient Greek engineer named Hero of Alexandria came up with a machine that could dispense a measured amount of holy water inside a temple. And that happened nearly 2,000 years before vending machines became commercially practical in the 1880s. Hero, who likely lived sometime between around 10 AD and 75 AD, was one of those rare minds who seemed born to build things no one else would even think of. He's often remembered for creating the Iolipile, a primitive steam turbine that was strangely ahead of its time. But his vending machine deserves just as much attention because, unlike some of his other inventions, this one had an immediate real-world use. Now, the mechanism behind his machine itself was brilliantly simple. A worshiper would place a coin into a slot, and that coin would fall onto a small pan attached to a lever. The weight of the coin would push the lever down, which opened a valve connected to a cistern of holy water. For a brief moment, water would flow out. Then, once the coin slid off the pan, the lever would return to its original position, and the valve would close again. That meant people could only receive the exact amount they had paid for. It's such a small idea on the surface, but it says a lot about how advanced Hero's thinking was. Long before modern engineering, long before electricity, and long before automated retail, this man had already built a working coin-operated machine. Number 6. The south-pointing spoon. The compass, as we know it, was created in ancient China during the Great Han Dynasty around the 2nd century BCE. Well, we don't know exactly when, but its roots go back much earlier than most people realize. Long before it guided sailors across oceans, people in China already knew that lodestone, a naturally magnetic mineral, had a strange pull over iron. For centuries, that mystery sat there, waiting to become useful. And once it did, it changed the world. Now, the earliest version didn't even look like the compass most of us picture. It was shaped like a spoon or ladle carved from lodestone and placed on a smooth bronze plate marked with directions. That's why it became known as the south-pointing spoon. Instead of pointing north like today's compasses, its handle aligned south, which held greater importance in ancient Chinese orientation and cosmology. At first, it wasn't used for navigation at all. It was tied more to geomancy, divination, and feng shui, helping people position buildings, tombs, and sacred spaces in harmony with the world around them. But eventually, someone realized this wasn't just spiritual theater. It could actually guide people, and that realization changed everything. By the 11th century, Chinese military forces were already using compasses for land navigation, and by the 12th century, they had become useful at sea. Newer versions appeared, including the south-pointing fish, a magnetized ironfish floating in water, and later dry compasses designed for more stable use. From there, the invention traveled west. Europe adopted it in the 12th century, and the Islamic world followed in the 13th century, even adapting it into Qibla compasses for prayer. It's hard to overstate what this little thing did. But what if it hasn't been invented? Number 5. The ancient wheel. Now, without this thing, we probably wouldn't recognize the world we live in. The wheel feels so basic and obvious that most people assume it must have been one of humanity's very first inventions. But strangely enough, it wasn't. By the time the wheel appeared around 4000 BCE, people were already casting metal alloys, building canals, sailing in boats, and making complex instruments like harps. That's what makes it so unique. The wheel didn't arrive at the beginning of civilization. It arrived when civilization was already learning how to move. But the real breakthrough wasn't just the wheel itself. Anyone could have noticed that round objects roll. The genius part was combining a wheel with a fixed axle. That's what changed it all. Without an axle, a wheel is just an object. With one, it becomes a machine, where the earliest use of that idea seems to have appeared in Mesopotamia, about 4000 BCE, where the first true potter's wheels were built. One of the oldest surviving examples was found in Ur and dates to around 3100 BCE. Not long after that, evidence of wheeled vehicles starts appearing by the late 4th millennium BCE. But the story may go even deeper. Some researchers now believe the wheel may have evolved in the Carpathian Mountains nearly 6,000 years ago, possibly among copper miners struggling to haul ore through narrow underground tunnels. Historian Richard Bulliet, along with engineers Kai James and Lee Alacoque, proposed that the wheel may have developed step by step from simple rollers, then grooved rollers, then wheel sets, and finally into the wheel and axle system we'd recognize today. That's what makes the wheel so incredible. And it didn't just help people travel. It changed labor, trade, transport, engineering, and nearly every machine that followed. Number 4. Ancient concrete. Now, we have a question for you. What is the most used substance in our world? If your answer is water, you are correct. Kinda obvious, right? But if you were asked, what is the second? Most people wouldn't guess concrete, but that's the answer. And once you think about it, it makes perfect sense. From roads to homes, from sidewalks to skyscrapers, it is almost everywhere. But what makes concrete so incredible isn't just how much we use it now. It's how absurdly far back its story goes. The roots of concrete may stretch all the way to around 3000 BC, when the Egyptians were already using early forms of it as mortar in construction. Some evidence even suggests forms of concrete-like material were being used as early as 6500 BC in parts of what is now Syria, where ancient builders made floors, walls, and cisterns using primitive hydraulic lime. By around 1300 BC, builders in the Middle East were coating clay fortresses with burned limestone, creating hard, protective outer surfaces through chemical reactions with the air. Then came the people who truly understood what this material could do: the Romans. By around 300 BCE, Roman builders had developed a remarkably durable form of concrete known as opus caementitium, made using lime, water, and volcanic ash, especially pozzolana. That volcanic ash made all the difference. It allowed the concrete to harden even in wet conditions and gave it super strength. That's one of the biggest reasons structures like the Pantheon, Roman harbors, and ancient aqueducts still exist after nearly 2,000 years. Much later, in 1824, an English bricklayer named Joseph Aspdin developed Portland cement, the foundation of modern concrete. From there, everything accelerated. By 1902, Auguste Perret was using steel-reinforced concrete in Paris, and in 1921, Eugène Freycinet pushed it even further. In simple words, concrete became one of the materials that built our very modern world. Number 3, the printing press. We all know that Johannes Gutenberg was the first person who got credit for the printing press. But he wasn't the first to print anything. Long before him, people in China were already using block printing to create texts. And by the 11th century, Bi Sheng had even developed movable type using clay. Korea later improved this with metal type in the 13th century. So the concept was already there, just not in a form that could truly spread. That's where Gutenberg comes in. Around 1436, working as a goldsmith in Germany, he took those earlier ideas and turned them into something far more practical. Instead of carving full pages, he created individual metal letters that could be arranged and reused. He also used a wine press to apply steady pressure, which made the printing process faster and more consistent. His biggest achievement came around 1455, when he printed about 200 copies of the Bible in just a few years. At that time, that speed was unheard of. What makes his story even stranger is that he didn't benefit much from it. He died in debt, and his equipment was taken from him. But his invention didn't fade with him. Books became easier to produce, cheaper to buy, as knowledge started reaching people outside the wealthy elite. And once that door opened, there was no closing it again. Number 2, the invention of writing. So when was writing actually invented? Well, historians know that it was around 3200 BC in ancient Mesopotamia. And that single step changed human history in a way almost nothing else ever has. Before that, people could speak, remember, repeat, and pass things down. But memory is fragile. Writing gave human beings something memory never could: permanence. The earliest true writing system was cuneiform, developed by the Sumerians in what is now Iraq. It worked by pressing wedge-shaped marks into soft clay tablets with a stylus. At first, it wasn't used for poetry, philosophy, or storytelling. It was much more practical than that. People needed a way to track goods, record trade, recount taxes, mark debts, and manage growing cities. In other words, writing began because civilization was getting too complicated to trust to memory alone. Around the same general period, Egypt developed hieroglyphics, using picture-based symbols on stone and papyrus for history, ritual, and religion. Much later, around 1200 BC, China developed oracle bone script, carved onto bones and turtle shells for divination. Then, around 1000 BC, the Phoenicians introduced a simpler alphabet with 22 consonantal characters, and that system would help shape the Greek and Latin alphabets that much of the Western world still depends on now. That's what makes writing so powerful. It didn't just preserve words. It preserved law, belief, trade, science, memory, and power. It allowed kingdoms to govern, merchants to calculate, priests to preserve sacred texts, and scholars to leave ideas behind for strangers they would never meet. Without writing, history would barely exist. Number 1, the watermill. Well, the invention of the watermill might not be the most obvious thing people think of when talking about world-changing ideas, but it quietly reshaped everyday life in ways that are hard to ignore. Long before engines and electricity, this was one of the first real ways humans learned to borrow power directly from nature. The basic idea was simple. Flowing water turned a wheel, and that motion was transferred through a shaft to do real work. Grinding grain into flour became faster and far less exhausting. What once took hours of manual labor could now be done effortlessly. That alone changed food production in a major way. Some of the earliest references go back to around the 3rd century BCE, with the Greek engineer Philo of Byzantium, who described early designs like the Paracora wheel. For a long time, people thought these ideas came from later sources, but research by historian M.J.T. Lewis confirmed their Greek origin. As time went on, Water mills spread across regions like Egypt and later medieval Europe, where they became essential. By 1086, records like the Domesday Book mention thousands already in use across England. It wasn't dramatic, but this thing shifted labor, saved time, and powered entire communities. Well, that's all from us. Be sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you soon.